first thing is always to find eye level, or in the case of a photo, the level of the camera, because that's where we have a horizontal line that will go across our page, or where we would have if there were something there to form a horizontal page. And we can work out where eye level is because it's where the angles, the perspective angles, change direction. And if we look at the right-hand side of this building, where we see the most extreme perspective angles most easily, we can see that they're very, very highly sloped at the top. They slope less and less as they come down to the awning. And if we keep going past down the awning, they're still sloping down. In fact, eye level is pretty much where the building hits the ground. And that's because the ground I'm on taking the photo is sloping down away. This building's on the top of a small mound, a small hill, if you like. And so I'm a bit downhill, and therefore eye level is on the ground in this instance, which does give a nice looking up effect, which I think works really well with capturing the cavities, visually the cavities that we have inside this balconied area out the front. And it's important to find eye level because that reminds me that every horizontal line that moves above this, that's on the same plane, will angle more and more as it goes higher. And that's what I'm doing here with what you're seeing me draw this. And I'm starting with this the front center part of this bowed out verandahed area. And I'm basically working down it, drawing the shapes that I see. Because the other thing that I do when I draw architecture is I look for shapes, but then I visualize forms. Because each of these little boxes I'm drawing is a shape. It has height, it has width, it's 2 dimensions. On a scrap of paper, you could cut it out. It could be a jigsaw puzzle of little almost parallelograms all pushed together. And yet the thing I'm drawing is a 3-dimensional thing. It's a building. It has height, it has width, but it also has depth, and every component has height, width, and depth. Some of that we can see the depth, and other parts we don't. But at the end, I want all of the marks I put on the paper to create a 3-dimensional effect. And that means I need to be careful at the front, at the start, that I don't compromise the marks, the ink I put on the paper, because I'm drawing freehand in ink. I'm drawing directly in ink. There's no pencil underlining, underdrawing. I can't erase anything. So every mark I'm making at this point has to in some way contribute towards the overall effect of a real life building. And that includes depth, it includes 3 dimensions. I can't compromise what I want at the end by carelessly putting ink on the paper now. So I'm being very careful at this point. Now, I'm also being very careful because at the very start, I choose my starting point carefully. I find the place that I think is going to be easiest to draw in proportion. A simple shape, preferably a box-like shape. And there are lots of those in this scene, so that's not a problem. But I choose a box-like shape if I can, because that means I only have height and width to worry about. I don't have depth as a problem. So I choose these very much square and rectangular shaped areas in the front. And once I draw a bit of that, going quite slowly and taking care to really work on proportions. Now I can use this as a point of reference to measure the rest of the drawing. Things that perhaps are a bit harder to eyeball, I have the additional tool of this measuring section. And I think of this as like my ruler that I'll use in the rest of the drawing. What I've drawn now becomes a ruler. And when I go to the left and right, I can compare where things are with that central section, firstly in the reference, and then use that to find the right point to put the ink, the accurate point to put the ink on the paper. Now I talked about speed, about going slower at the start. So let me remind you, you're looking at this being drawn at 2.5 times my drawing speed. This 21-minute drawing took me 60 minutes to do in real life. And one of the problems with watching sped up demos, I understand why they're sped up because people are less inclined to watch a video that takes 60 minutes, certainly not to get to the end. But the problem with a sped up demo is it gives an unrealistic sense of the time, the commitment it takes, and also of the process, because a lot of the drawing is spent pausing and just looking and working out. That's as much a vital part of the end result as when the ink is on the paper, as when I'm withholding the ink from the paper to work out where to put that next bit of ink and how to put it, and making sure I'm connecting the right point of the photo with the right point in my drawing. Especially a scene like this, it's very easy to confuse which box I'm in and therefore put a window in something that doesn't have a window, or to draw a window in the middle of a column rather than between the columns. We've all done that, I'm sure. And so pausing while we just establish things, and that's one reason why I've put the detail of punching these holes, if you like, in effect, visually putting the holes in to the front balcony areas and putting some windows on the wall behind. It's so that I get a clearer orientation of what's what. What's column, what's squared brick column at the front, and what's wall behind. What's a decorative band and what's not. So by putting a bit of detail very carefully in earlier, it does make it much easier for me to navigate with more speed where I'm up to in the drawing. So I work out the best place to start based on proportions, and also I like it based on ease of drawing it accurately, but I also choose something where I think it's going to be easier to get the right proportions. I go slow at the start and I speed up. That slowness at the start pays off before the end of the drawing, because it enables me, once I establish these reference areas, proportion and scale and size reference areas in my early part of the drawing, I can speed up later without losing any accuracy. So another thing I'm doing now is when I have a width area to work out, so when we're expanding in all directions in a box-like structure, as in lots of architecture, I go upwards and I go horizontally. When I go horizontally, one thing I pay attention to do, and this makes a huge difference for me, is I always look at the, if you like, the 180 degree width that I'm needing to cover, that I'm needing to estimate. I don't look at the diagonal line. I don't look at the perspective angle that might be above or below the width I want to establish. I look at my reference and I eyeball a directly 180 degree horizontal line from whatever I've already drawn, and relative, of course, to the proportions of what I've already drawn, I work out, well, okay, this width is going to be half the one I've already done next to it, or it's going to be 4 times the one I've already done. But I don't go down the diagonal in measuring that, because I found that in practice, going down the diagonal always causes me to overestimate the length. Now, another thing I do at the very start is to work out, am I going to draw this as I see it in the reference, or am I going to make changes? So one of the decisions I made with this view of the old Palisade Hotel, pub with hotel rooms above, which has since been made into a luxury apartment, is to not add the modern penthouse on top, which I'm sure is very valuable Sydney real estate with its beautiful views of Sydney Harbour and some of the main visual attractions of Sydney Harbour. Now, another tip for drawing architecture when we have lettering is not to treat it as writing, but to treat it the way we're treating everything else, which is shapes and forms to put accurately on our drawing. If I think of it as writing, I'm going to be tempted just to write it, and I'm not going to bring all the skills I need to, and well, maybe not so much skills as process, as thinking, if I'm thinking of it as writing, because the important thing with writing is to position it carefully. Besides the shape of the letters, it's to actually have it so it reads correctly with space for all the letters in the right spot. And a very common drawing mistake I see is that there's simply not room for the last 2 or 3 letters and they have to be squeezed in, and that just looks ludicrous. It's such a visually a disruption, a distraction from whatever may work well in the drawing. And so I treat these as shapes that are positioned in certain places across the facade. I work out where the center of the space between the first and last letter is and what letter is there. It's not necessarily the middle letter if there is an odd number of letters, because the middle letter will partly depend on how wide the other letters are. But I work out where the center is of the space and what letter's there, and I work out the center of that space in my drawing, and I put that letter there, and now I go left and right letter by letter. So I don't start with the P and finish with the E. I start with the I, and then I do the SADE, and then I do the LAP. And that lets me get things in proportion. I also often estimate how much space do I need for each letter to finish it in the right spot. So do not underestimate the importance of putting as much effort, if not more effort, into adding text on our architecture as we do with any other part of it. Now, I talked earlier about seeing the shapes, particularly all the four-sided shapes here. But then I've got to always, though, be considering the total three-dimensional form. And connected with that, I need to be working out where it is in the depth of plane. So which parts are closer and which parts are further away. Because it often is very effective with the closer parts to work at a heavier, more solid, if you like, mark making. And as we go further away, the lines can start to become a bit lighter, a bit thinner. And the detail can also be drawn perhaps, well, in less detail, more through shadows than anything else. Not trying to so much draw the shapes, which often become awkward to do at extreme angles, such as we have here, such as I'm doing at the moment. The other thing, of course, is the foreshortening, the going out horizontally, that as things move further away, they don't just get shorter, but they get narrower as well. And so where we have, as we do have here, a building where we have this a central decoration and the same decoration on each side, we have symmetry in the decoration. I need to make sure that the closer half is actually wider than the further away half. But I find that by doing lighter lines all over at the start and lighter marks in general, what I can then do is come back later in the drawing and strengthen areas that are closer, that I want to visually make more attention grabbing and have a sense of being closer to us. And it's easier to add ink later in the drawing process than to try and get ink off the paper that we wish wasn't there. And of course we can't do that. So that's always the thing, is to early in a freehand drawing put marks and things on the paper that leave room to make adjustments later when we have more of the subject drawn, and we can start to see how it's all going to work together to try and really enhance that sense of 3 dimensions. And as I said earlier, I put in the darkest values first, and we can do that if we have an area, as I had here with the center windows, that is obviously darker than most of the values we have in the scene. I can go quite dark quite early, and then I use that as a measure for how dark I go in other places. So I reference what I've already drawn. If there's no values that are sort of obviously darker, then I find it better to go lighter with all the values, and then I can tweak some of them darker according to what's going to look best for my drawing. It's often very hard to know at the start what the overall effect's going to be, and therefore what's going to create the most clarity or avoid confusion or simply look nice and dramatic, but still stay within the bounds of looking realistic. So It's often, usually in my case, towards the end of a drawing, particularly one with a lot of values, a lot of lights and darks, where the final adjustments are made. And so I have to be patient and not try and go too dark too quickly, but to save room to adjust the final things when I can see where I've gone. Now, another issue with brick buildings is, do we draw the bricks? Now, I think it's very rare we should try and draw all the bricks, certainly not in a quick sketch. But do we suggest the brickwork somewhere, create the effect of brickwork, just so that it's easier for the brain to realize, oh, this is a brick building. But when I look at this, although if I peer carefully at the photo, I can see individual bricks. They're extremely small. In effect, they're really blending into that pleasant sort of warm light brown color, light reddy brown color. And the individual bricks don't stand out. And the fact that we have these concreted bands, veneered bands over the top in a more yellowy beige color, makes that stand out and the brickwork disappear even more. So in this case, I'm not going to. But I do have a playlist on drawing the effect of detail, and drawing brickwork is the title of 3 or 4 different individual videos I have. So if you struggle with capturing the effect of bricks, why not have a check at one of those? Now, we're getting towards the final parts of this. And one of the things that I think is very important when drawing architecture is to embrace the opportunity for foliage, because foliage is such a wonderful contrast to architecture. The way it looks, what it is, usually the color as well. Not many buildings are green. And when we look at this reference, the building feels more building-like through the contrast we have with the trees around it. The other thing foliage often does, it lets us put a dark value behind the building, which helps to push the building forward and make it feel more three-dimensional. Because something becomes more three-dimensional as we bring things closer from it, but also as we put things behind it. Anything that increases the depth of plane, the sense of nearest and furthest, and therefore everything in between, I think visually creates a great effect when we draw. So the biggest danger with trees is that they get stuck on as an afterthought, where our interest and possibly our attention and experience is drawing architecture, and we're not so keen on trees, and possibly we've never really worked hard to find a satisfactory way of drawing them, and we just kind of hope for the best. And that can mean that trees often end up being a weak spot in a drawing. Now, the important thing with trees in a scene such as this is that we don't overdraw them. If we start drawing leaves, then the trees are going to look way closer and way more important than we want them to be. We really want to create value. We want to create the amount of dark the green presents, and we want to create the effect of a tree rather than starting to draw leaves. So that's what I'm doing now. But you can see how we have a wonderful opportunity for putting marks that are very different types of marks, different speed of marks, different angles of marks. And we can bring them carefully right up to the building and also get a sense of this is behind. And that increases the three-dimensionality of it. Please hit the like button if you're finding this interesting. And why not check out my drawing architecture playlist as well? Although virtually, every video of mine is really either architecture or it's a natural bushland scene, or it's a combination of the two. So now we have the building that's just a bit further down the street, and look at the difference with how I drew that architecture very quickly, very lightly, and not adding all the detail that I can see in the reference, because I want it to feel further down the street, and things further away, further down the street, we don't see them with as much clarity, we don't see as much detail, the effect overall is lighter. The edges and the corners and what we do see, overall the feel is lighter than the things that are closest to us. So we want to find marks that will capture that different visual appearance of what we see. And this is how we get a sense of reality. And cameras don't do that. Cameras overcatch detail. They catch too much detail all over the scene, far more than we take in or the way we see it with our eyes in life. And that's why we don't want to copy the photo. If our aim is to copy the photo perfectly, we will copy the weaknesses of a photo, the ways in which a photo doesn't capture reality. Instead, we get to recreate what the photo doesn't have. I think of it as translating the photo into a drawing, translating one visual language into another. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. What do you think? Drawing architecture is a fantastic freehand subject, so why not give it a go? You'll find this photo on my channel post page, and you can have a go using this reference. But whatever you draw, however it turns out, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.